I sit in the front row of Horizon Outfitters' glass-walled boardroom in downtown Chicago, watching my coworker Ethan Keller click through slide after slide like he owns the place. He's standing there in a $1,000 suit, flashing his Harvard smile, selling a $28 million strategy deck built entirely on numbers I designed, numbers I deliberately broke. The room smells of fresh coffee and expensive leather. Horizon's CEO leans forward, nodding along, while their CFO, Margaret Doyle, studies the graphs with a sharp eye. Ethan is in his element, arms spread wide like a preacher delivering Sunday gospel. Then she cuts him off. "Mr. Keller, are you seriously suggesting we stock swimsuits in December in Chicago?" The air shifts. It's the kind of silence you can hear. Ethan laughs nervously, tries to spin it, but the CFO isn't buying. The confidence drains from his face in real time. And that's when I smile. Just slightly, because I know exactly what's happening. Freeze frame. You're probably wondering how a seasoned executive like him ended up pitching beachwear in a Midwest blizzard. Let me rewind 3 months, back to the moment I decided enough was enough. My name is Dahlia Mercer, 44 years old, senior data analyst at Northbridge Analytics. 10 years of keeping billion-dollar clients afloat with models I rebuilt at 3 in the morning. 10 years of watching my work paraded by someone else in nicer shoes. I'm divorced, no kids, and if I'm honest, my job has been my entire identity. And yet, around here, I'm reliable support, not leadership material. That's corporate speak for she does the heavy lifting, but we don't see her in the corner office. I've sat through meetings where 27-year-old MBAs presented my frameworks word for word without understanding a single principle. I've been told to smile more while someone else signed their name on my deck. Invisible, replaceable, until Ethan Keller showed up too polished, too hungry, and just arrogant enough to think stealing my login was a shortcut to greatness. That was his first mistake. See? I gave him exactly what he wanted. 6 pristine files, each one dressed up like $1 million, each one ready to collapse under the slightest pressure. A symphony of traps, tucked neatly in a folder labeled Horizon Final Reports DM. DM. My initials? Easy to miss if you weren't looking. So when Ethan strutted into Horizon's boardroom with my work under his arm, he wasn't just holding a presentation, he was holding a live grenade, and I was sitting in the front row, waiting for the pin to pop. My name is Dahlia Mercer. I'm 44 years old, a senior data analyst at Northbridge Analytics here in Chicago, divorced, no kids, somewhere along the way. My career stopped being just a career and became the whole definition of me. For 10 years, I've been the one behind the curtain, cleaning up everyone else's mess. When a pharmaceutical client realized their predictive models were built on corrupted data, I rebuilt 18 months of analysis in 4 days working through Christmas while the executives were skiing in Aspen. When a Fortune 500 retailer merged databases with the wrong primary keys, I was called at 11:30 on a Friday night and had it fixed by dawn. Each time, I saved contracts worth tens of millions. Each time. My reward was the same, a polite thank you. Then silence. In meetings, my work showed up dressed in someone else's voice. I'd watch fresh-faced MBAs stand in front of the boardroom screen, parroting frameworks I'd built line by line, unable to explain why they even worked. And still, they'd be praised as visionary. Me, I sat quietly in the back, scribbling notes, the invisible insurance policy the company couldn't afford to lose but never wanted to promote. The official line on my performance reviews was always glowing, with one familiar asterisk: reliable, exceptionally competent. Not quite leadership material. That phrase is corporate code, and I've heard it too many times to count. It means she does the heavy lifting, but she doesn't play golf with the CEO's buddies. She doesn't charm at cocktail parties. She doesn't look like someone we picture in the corner office. And after a decade, I learned the hard truth: being indispensable in corporate America isn't the same thing as being valued. If anything, it's a trap. The more reliable you are, the easier it is for them to lean on you, bury you, and forget your name when the spotlight comes on. So I kept my head down, did my work, and lived in that strange half-light between being essential and being invisible, until Ethan Keller walked into Northbridge too polished, too loud, too ready to use me as his personal stepping stone. That's when I realized invisibility wasn't going to cut it anymore. The call came on a Monday morning. Northbridge had landed Horizon Outfitters an engagement worth $28 million, the kind of project consultants dream about, case study material, the kind that gets you promoted, maybe even your name in the Wall Street Journal. For once, my phone buzzed with something other than another late-night fire drill. On the kickoff call, our CEO, Richard Sloan, did something he had never done before he said my name. Clear as day. "Dahlia will be instrumental to this project's success," he announced, as if the words cost him nothing. Her technical expertise is exactly what Horizon needs. I froze for half a second, then scribbled it in my notebook like a middle schooler writing down her crush's initials. Dahlia will be instrumental. 10 years of being the ghost in the machine. And finally, maybe. This was my shot at the front of the room instead of the back. I let myself hope just a little. That same week, an email from Sloan's office dropped into my inbox. "Please welcome our newest strategic hire, Ethan Keller." The attachment was a headshot that looked like it belonged in a venture capital brochure. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of smile that says, "I've never had to debug code at 3 a.m. The email gushed about him. Harvard MBA. Turned around 3 startups, though anyone who read between the lines knew they'd all folded. Led a digital transformation at a Fortune 500. Gave a TED Talk on authentic leadership in the data age. He was 36, barely younger than me, but dressed like he had an expense account for his tailor. By Thursday, Sloan introduced him at an all-hands meeting. "Ethan will be leading our Horizon Outfitters engagement," Sloan declared, glowing with pride. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Dahlia will be supporting all analysis, modeling, and technical implementation. Supporting. That word cut deeper than any insult I'd heard in my career. Supporting meant my name would show up in 8-point font on slide 47. While Ethan soaked up the applause, supporting meant I'd do the work and watch someone else claim the crown. And I realized then that invisibility wasn't just lonely, it was dangerous. 2 weeks into Horizon, I was buried in a predictive model that felt like solving a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. My office sat wedged between the server room and the supply closet. No windows, no foot traffic, perfect for disappearing. That's where Ethan found me. He didn't knock. Guys like him never knock. He leaned in the doorway, cologne hitting the room before he did, a rehearsed grin on his face. "Need your login for the Horizon folders ASAP," he said. Not a question, not even a pause, just an order. I swiveled in my chair, careful to keep my tone neutral. "Those folders are my working files. They're not ready for client eyes yet." He waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I just need to pull some visualizations for tomorrow's check-in." I wanted to say no, to remind him that credentials aren't candy you just hand out. But I'd been here before 6 years of hearing someone else pitch my work. 6 years of executives nodding along like the ideas sprang from someone else's head. If I pushed back, I'd be labeled difficult. And difficult women don't get promoted. They get replaced. So I nodded slowly. Buying time. I'll see what I can pull together. He smirked like victory was already his and strolled off, phone buzzing in his hand, probably lining up his next audience. When the door clicked shut, I sat there staring at my screen. heart pounding. I thought about every late night I'd rebuilt projects from scratch, every time I'd sat silent while some fresh suit took the credit, and suddenly, exhaustion curdled into something colder: calculation. If Ethan wanted my login, he'd get it, just not the way he thought. That night, after the office emptied, I opened a blank directory on the server and named it Horizon Final Reports DM, my initials, tucked in like a watermark no one would notice. Inside, I began building something new, not lies too easy to spot. No, this would be a symphony of polished mistakes dashboards that dazzled until you scratched beneath the surface, formulas that collapsed under real scrutiny. Ethan thought he was walking into a shortcut. What he didn't know was that he'd just opened the door to his own downfall. Building those files felt less like sabotage and more like composition. Every analyst knows the beauty of clean data. Neat formulas, models that sing when you stress test them. But this time, my job wasn't to make the music perfect. It was to make sure it collapsed on the wrong stage. The first piece of my symphony was customer retention analysis. I flipped the churn rate on its head. Where Horizon actually retained 82% of their premium members, my model showed 18, a silent alarm designed to trigger panic. Next came revenue projections for Q3 and Q4. I pulled real numbers but from Australian stores, left in Australian dollars, then displayed as US dollars on paper. The growth looked miraculous. In reality, it was millions off. File 3 Market Segmentation. I dug out their 2014 logic. Before Horizon pivoted to Gen Z, my version told them to chase retirees, the very group that had stopped driving sales years ago. For the fourth act, inventory optimization, I inverted seasonal coefficients. According to my file, December demanded swimsuits while July begged for snow boots. Then came the pricing model. I stripped out elasticity, the measure of how sensitive customers are to price changes. My version encouraged suicidal hikes in categories where Horizon shoppers were notoriously thrifty. Finally, the crown jewel competitive analysis. I blended Horizon's data with their top competitors, so their strategy literally compared themselves to themselves. Each file was polished, glossy, and carried timestamps dated weeks before Ethan's arrival. My fingerprints were everywhere, just subtle enough to prove ownership when the time came. Meanwhile, in my secure folders, I built the real versions. Transparent assumptions, annotated sources, sensitivity analyses, everything Horizon actually needed, and to seal it. I wrote a small Python script. Nothing fancy. Just enough to log every time Ethan accessed, downloaded, or renamed my files. Digital breadcrumbs. Undeniable proof. By the time I was done, I didn't just have 6 files, I had 6 perfectly wrapped grenades. All I had to do now was sit back and wait for Ethan to pull the pins. Ethan didn't waste a second. By the very next morning, he was waving my dummy dashboards in front of the team like he'd stayed up all night crafting them himself. I crunched the numbers till 3 a.m., he said, grinning as if lack of sleep were proof of genius. The room chuckled, impressed. I kept my face neutral, pen scratching across my notebook as though I were just another quiet support staffer. What they didn't see was the Python script humming quietly in the background, logging every download, every rename, every time Ethan stripped my initials from a file. At the weekly stand-up, he pitched the inverted retention analysis with that trademark swagger. These churn numbers are a wake-up call. Horizon's bleeding premium members. CEO Richard Sloan leaned forward, nodding like he'd just witnessed brilliance. Outstanding work. Ethan, this is exactly the kind of insight we hired you for. My stomach tightened, but I stayed stone-faced. To argue now would ruin the setup. Better to let the rope play out. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Late one afternoon, I noticed a calendar invite floating across my inbox: National Data Science Conference, abstract submission deadline. Out of curiosity, I checked the shared drive. There it was, Ethan's proposal, built line by line from my poisoned projections. He was trying to turn Horizon's fabricated growth story into a keynote-worthy breakthrough. If the conference committee bought it, his fraud wouldn't just fool Horizon or Sloan, it would go national. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but then a calmer thought slipped in. Perfect? More rope? That evening, a confirmation email landed in the project inbox, congratulating him on his submission, before anyone else saw it. I quietly forwarded it to myself and dropped it into my evidence folder, right alongside the logs and screenshots. Another breadcrumb, waiting for the day the trail led straight back to him. Ethan thought he was climbing. Every compliment, every nod from Sloan, every little laugh in those meetings, he mistook it all for altitude. But the truth, he wasn't rising. He was standing on a pile of garbage I'd built for him, and sooner or later, it was going to collapse. About 3 weeks before the Horizon Board presentation, a company-wide email dropped into my inbox. Ethan's name sat bold at the top, CC'd to CEO Richard Sloan, the partners, and me. Looking forward to presenting our groundbreaking analysis to Horizon. Dahlia has prepared the technical backup if questions come up. I read it twice, then a third time. My jaw tightened. There it was, his safety net. If the numbers collapsed, if Horizon's execs started poking holes, the blame was already assigned. Dahlia Mercer, the quiet analyst in the back. The ghost? Rage flickered, hot and fast. I could almost see him smirking as he hit send, thinking he'd sealed his escape hatch. But underneath the anger came something colder, steadier. Satisfaction. Because what Ethan didn't know was that by putting my name on the hook, he tied himself to the very evidence I'd been building. He thought that line in his email was clever. In reality, it was a chain wrapped snugly around his own ankle. I opened my evidence folder that night and scrolled through what I'd gathered: Python logs with timestamps, screenshots of Slack threads where he bragged about his analysis, metadata showing my initials buried in the original files. And now, his own email practically announcing to leadership that I had custody of the data. He hadn't covered himself. He'd reinforced my case. In meetings that week, Ethan turned the volume up even louder. This segmentation strategy, revolutionary. The projections, conservative. Honestly, he made sure Sloan and the partners heard his name attached to every slide. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the edge of the table, scribbling notes I didn't need, nodding in all the right places. The model of support. And every time he passed my work off as his own, I logged it, cataloged it, and tucked it neatly into the growing narrative. He thought he'd set me up as the scapegoat, but the truth was simpler. The trap was already set, and Ethan had just locked himself inside it. The Horizon boardroom sat on the 30th floor, overlooking Lake Michigan like a monument to money and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a polished walnut table big enough for 20, and a view that could make even seasoned executives sit up straighter. I took my seat in the front row, laptop closed, leather portfolio on my lap. Across the table sat Horizon's leadership Margaret Doyle, their CFO with a reputation for slicing through nonsense like a scalpel, and James Morrison, the CEO who'd built the company from a single Chicago storefront. Heavy hitters. Ethan started strong, his voice smooth as silk. Slide 1, polished corporate overview. Slide 2, market buzzwords about next-gen retail intelligence. He smiled, gestured like a pro. Sloan and the partners looked on proudly, as if this was exactly what they'd paid for. Then came slide 5, a gleaming chart predicting 43% growth in Q4. Margaret's brow furrowed. "Mr. Keller," she said evenly, "we've never exceeded Q3 in 32 years. What exactly explains this spike?" Ethan chuckled, as if she'd asked about the weather. "Untapped winter markets. These projections are conservative. Honestly, conservative." My pen stilled on the page. I could see Margaret's lips tighten. The next slide flashed up customer segmentation. Retirees. Marked in bold as Horizon's primary growth demographic, Margaret snapped her head up. 78% of our revenue comes from Gen Z. "Where are you getting this?" Ethan's smile wavered. "Just slightly. That's exactly the paradigm shift we're proposing." Then came the inventory model. Swimsuits in December, snow boots in July. The room erupted. Executives pulled out phones, flipped through internal reports, whispering across the table. This can't be right. Where did these numbers come from finally? Morrison leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "Mr. Keller, are you seriously suggesting we rewrite our business model based on this?" Ethan's forehead glistened, his hand trembling on the clicker. He tried to answer, words tumbling out like broken glass. Then Margaret turned her eyes to me. "Miss Mercer," she said, crisp and deliberate. "Do you have anything to add?" The moment I'd been waiting for had finally arrived. I rose from my chair, smoothing my charcoal jacket like I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. My laptop was already primed. I held up the HDMI cable. "May I, James Morrison, Horizon's CEO?" Gave a short nod. "Please." The screen flickered, Ethan's fantasy vanishing, replaced by my reality. Clean charts, transparent assumptions, data that could withstand a microscope. "This projection," I began, my voice steady, "accounts for your seasonal fluctuations. Horizon historically sees 8% growth in Q3 tapering to 5% in Q4. The numbers on the screen lined up neatly with their own records. Heads around the table dipped in recognition. Click. The segmentation slide. Your core growth market is millennials and Gen Z, 78% of revenue. The previous analysis showing retirees relied on outdated logic from nearly a decade ago. Margaret Doyle leaned forward, scanning the numbers. This matches our internal forecasts exactly. Click. Retention analysis. Your premium members retain at 82%, which is industry leading. Any model suggesting otherwise is working from corrupted formulas. I let the words hang, not looking at Ethan, though I could feel him shrinking beside the wall. A wave of relief moved across the room, like oxygen rushing back into tired lungs. Executives leaned back, pens scribbling notes. The tension eased on their side. Anyway, but I wasn't done. I opened one more folder. Evidence. On the screen appeared timestamps, metadata logs, screenshots of Slack threads where Ethan claimed ownership of my files, access scripts showing every time he entered my dummy directory. The digital fingerprints were undeniable. The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush. Finally. Morrison broke it. His voice carried the weight of final judgment. "If you want our business," he said, eyes fixed on Sloan and then Ethan, "Ms. Mercer leads this project. Non-negotiable." I closed my laptop slowly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at my mouth. For the first time in 10 years, the spotlight wasn't just brushing past me, it was mine. By the end of that day, Ethan was gone. Security walked him out in front of the same people who'd once hung on his every word, his badge deactivated, his conference abstract quietly withdrawn, the industry rumor mill spinning faster than a Chicago windstorm. Within a week, his LinkedIn profile went dark. Richard Sloan did his best to spin it, talking about unfortunate miscommunication and leadership realignment, but Horizon's demand was ironclad. If they were going to keep the $28 million contract, I would lead the engagement. No debate, no negotiation, just fact. The announcement hit the office like a thunderclap. For years, I'd walked past coworkers who barely knew my name. Now they came by my desk with awkward smiles and quiet confessions. Stories poured out, credit stolen, ideas lifted, long nights erased by louder voices. I wasn't alone. I was just the first to fight back. When I built my new project team, I didn't choose the flashiest talkers or the resume darlings. I picked the ones who'd been overlooked, the quiet analysts who actually knew their craft. Competence over polish, substance over spin. 4 months later, Horizon's numbers told the story better than I ever could. 9% growth, $3 million saved in inventory optimization. Morrison sent a handwritten note, an actual letter on stationery praising the work. I framed it and hung it on my office wall. My new office, the one with windows overlooking the lake. Ethan tried twice to claw his way back, emails with subject lines like, "Can we talk? And I owe you an explanation." I answered only once, with a single word, no. Because in corporate America, arrogance might get you on stage, but integrity keeps you in the room. And if someone steals your work, make sure what they're stealing is exactly what they deserve.